Uh, you came on the scene big time nationally at the Democratic National Convention. You did the major address there. And at that time, you said there is not a black states of America and a white states of America. There are not red states and blue states. There are United States of America. And then you entered the Senate, and here we are in your second year. Just how united are the states?
Well, I think we are still divided politically as a country. I think that people are getting more unified in being dissatisfied with the current direction of the country, the polls indicate. But on a whole host of issues, we're still divided. I think that oftentimes politics is exploiting those divisions instead of trying to mediate them. Some of those divisions are social in nature, and they're hard to resolve because on an issue like abortion, if people feel very strongly on one side or the other, it's hard to split the difference. But on a lot of issues, I think that common sense should prevail, and we should be able to craft a policy to improve energy conservation or to deal with our healthcare crisis. And right now, our politics is not dealing with those in sort of the pragmatic, non-ideological ways that I think would be good for the country.
And I want
that race.
A quick look at the 2008 election. I know you're not running. Hillary Clinton. Some say, you know what? Democrats love her, but she can't win. She's recently taken money from Rupert Murdoch. They're questioning that. You've got Joe Biden. So many hats in the ring, and I know it's early, but if you had advice for somebody out there, an early front runner, what are you thinking?
I've got to be careful here because about half of my colleagues, I think, are running for office. I think that what the American people are looking for right now is authenticity. I think they want somebody who they feel is talking to them honestly and with conviction and has a vision about the future. And, what they're, I think, will be turned off by is too much political calculation, too much spin, too many sound bites, too much jargon. I think that kind of politics has played itself out.
Howard Dean is coming true on his promise to bring the Democrats back on a statewide level, giving money to all 50 states. Senator Schumer, Rahm Emanuel, they're concerned about that, saying we've got to go for the strong states. We have just a minute, but where do you stand on that?
I think that's inside baseball. I think the ordinary voters, they want to know what you're going to do about gas prices and what are you going to do about health care. And I think that kind of message, if delivered well, will play not just in the target states, it'll play across the country.
Finally, is the country ready to elect a woman or an African-American president?
Sure. I truly believe that.
Well, we know it won't be you soon, but is it somewhere in the cards one day? Does Barack Obama look and say, maybe one day?
I don't think that far ahead. All right.
Well, we'll be watching for you.
Thank
you so much, Senator, for your time. You are a busy man. We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us here on Political Update. We're here on a special edition from the offices of U.S. Senator Barack Obama, and I'm Paul Lisnek. We'll see you next time. I want to bring it home to just some political lessons. I love this story you have in the book. Early on, I think, in the career. Your wife, Nancy, who is almost as famous as you. Everybody knows Nancy. You met her when you volunteered for Korea. You were doing training in Louisville, and that's when you met the lovely Nancy Anderson. But she had an experience, you write about in the book, in which she went to vote. And she took 35 seconds to cast her ballot. And in those days, where she was and you were being watched, that was not looked positively upon. Tell me why 35 seconds was a mistake.
That was back here in Chicago, and I was a young reformer, right out of law school, beating the drums for reform. And yes, I knew how to vote the straight Democratic ticket. I wasn't an amateur reformer, but
She'd only take 5 seconds.
She walked her feet were observed walking, across the old polling machine, and you didn't have to take that long or walk across to vote the straight Democratic ticket. So sure enough, the next day the plumbing inspector arrives, and then the fire inspector, and we thought to ourselves, gee, the people who used to own this house either. Well, they must have known how to vote. These problems had been in that house forever. They must have known how to vote the straight Democratic ticket fast.
You left the Senate in 1981. You served 2 terms, chose not to seek a 3rd term. You ran for governor in 1982, got the Democratic nomination. But at that time, this view of you, and I want to tackle this tough issue, the view of you as an anti-Semite emerged. It's one you, of course, refused. You had Harold Washington supporting you in that election. You lost to Jim Thompson. Where did it come from? What was that all about?
It came from my efforts to prevent terrorism. My wife and I had followed the Israeli troops into the Golan Heights and into the West Bank and East Jerusalem after the '67 war. We'd into the Palestinian refugee camps. We'd seen the evidence of ethnic cleansing. Then I didn't go back until about 10 years later, after the Likud came to power and began systematically colonizing, occupying Palestine, and the peace treaty which neutralized Egypt. And then I thought, oh, it's only a matter of time. So I began the first in-depth study of terrorism, which led to the Comprehensive Anti-Terrorism Act of 1979, and with explicit predictions. Don't think it can't happen here. And a separate measure, which I introduced, reduced funding for Israel by $200 million a year, roughly the cost we were contributing to the settlements, until such time as the president could certify that Israel's policies, settlements policies, were consistent with our policies. I wanted to demonstrate, I knew I couldn't win, that given a choice between supporting the United States and supporting Israel's defiance of the United States and, incidentally, the United Nations, the Congress would support Israel. I got 7 votes. We shared a home with Jewish friends, one of whom called AIPAC, the leader of the so-called Israeli lobby, why are you going after Stevenson? He's not running for president. He's not going to have anything to do with foreign policy. He said, well, if we don't stop him in Illinois for governor, he will run for president. And besides, they said, he's an anti-Semite. To my Semitic friend. And, of course, many Jews, the most knowledgeable, like Phil Klesnik, president of the World Council of Jewry, but he'd also been an American ambassador, who knew the truth, were with me 100%. In fact, they were advisors. They were with me. But not many had the courage to stand up. They would wilt under pressure.
Anything else, it's a changed city because immigrants and young people are coming. And when they come together, great things happen. I really believe that.
Whether you like it or not, things are going to get named after you one day. So if you could put the word out and say, look, here's what I'm most proud of. Your father's name stands on the courthouse. I'm not sure if that's what he would have picked, but that's where it is. My guess is Millennium Park, but the Richard M. Daley what?
Well, I don't know. I don't. My theory is I would like to have maybe scholarships in my name for young people in communities that never had an opportunity of going to college. Something like that. You have to take what you try to do in education and have survived, and something like that I think is important. Education scholarships for children at school. To me, that would be beneficial. And not only an education scholarship, but also a scholarship from graduating from high school to get a job and then be able to go on to school at night. That would be tremendous for me. So that young man or woman come from high school, start working for a company, and they know they have a scholarship named on my behalf for them, and they go to night school, and maybe they get a year off to go to, things like that. I think that would really benefit what I think government should do. That Mayor Daley gets up and says, you better go do that. You can't tell anyone in life to do something they don't want to do.
Most people, they got that you had a good relationship with Democratic presidents, President Obama, Clinton. A lot of people were surprised that you and certainly George W. Bush got along very well. So it's not a party issue.
I can't understand why. Why would people think that? I'm a mayor first. I'm not a Democrat first. I'm not a Republican or independent. I'm the mayor of the city of Chicago first and foremost. And once you're elected in government, you don't represent your party. You represent the people, whether they voted for you or not, or they didn't vote or couldn't vote for you, or they could not vote. They're not citizens. I represent all of them. We have to get back to America believing that after an election, that you represent all of them. When I got elected in '89, so that meant only 8% of the African American vote voted for me. They voted for Tim Evans. In some way, they didn't think I was mayor. No, you work with them. That's what you have to do. We got back. The federal government is divided. I'm a Republican. I'm a Democrat. I thought you pay their taxes. and you never voted. They're supposed to represent you anyway.
I want to visit your early days for a little bit. Growing up, we read books about your father and your mother. Talk to me about the values they instilled in you.
Well, again, when I look, in fact, my father would say, we're going to give you values from our family and our church beliefs. And my father always believed that church was personal. It wasn't something that you walked around and confronted people. So it's personal. And values, everybody has values. And so he always taught me that. Don't ever worry about someone's religion. And secondly, he said, I'll give you an education and I'll give you tools for life. And that was my parents' belief. The home environment was our home environment. And my father never made his home the office, a political or government office. It was never that. And those who came within our home, they wanted to be there, not for personal or political reasons. And that was very important, because you have to protect your family, and you have to do that. Otherwise, you jeopardize what family have you for your own political career, and that's unfair.
Welcome to a very special edition of Political Update. I'm Paul Lisnek. The 9 justices who sit on the United States Supreme Court are appointed for life. Rarely do any of them agree to sit for a public interview. But Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg agreed to sit with me and talk about her childhood, the importance of her parents, and her work on our country's highest court. I want to just briefly touch on Bush versus Gore. Probably the case of a generation, for certainly today's generation. And I teach constitutional law, and one of the points that I read in your dissent, so now I get to ask you if I was right or wrong. I noticed that when you ended your decision, you ended with the words, "I dissent." And I've said to my students, I thought it was clearly a decision where emotions were high. I could almost feel I hesitate to use the word anger, but I'll go ahead and use the word anger in the decision. Can you shed a little bit of light about that, the impact of that decision in our society?
Well, first, I would say the overwhelming emotion was exhaustion with Bush v. Gore, because the court agreed to take the case on a Saturday. Briefs were filed on a Sunday. Oral argument was Monday, and the decision was out on Tuesday. So we were up virtually around the clock, the justices and the law clerks. By the end, we were all exhausted.
The decision itself, of course, determined who the President of the United States was. That was the effect of it.
Well, I would challenge that. I think it made that decision sooner rather than later. But I don't think the decision would have been different. It would have been a different decision maker. It would have been, as I thought was what the Constitution required, if there's a disputed election, it's the job of the House of Representatives to decide. And the House at that time had a Republican majority. I think the end result would have been the same. It just would have come weeks later. And some people thought that the court was right to take the public out of its agony, to have that decision made sooner rather than later. But people who say that it determined the result of the election, I think there's strong reason to doubt that that's the case. It was, for me, a who decides question. And it seemed quite clear to me that the Constitution said when there is a dispute about the election returns, the House of Representatives is the proper decision maker. So I thought the court should have stayed out of that controversy and let the political process continue to unfold.
The divisions of the court, Chief Justice Roberts came on and said, we want to see more unity. We continue to see 5-4 decisions. But my question is a personal one, which is, you're almost always on the opposite side of Justice Scalia. But everybody knows you and Justice Scalia, from what I understand, are very good friends. How do you balance personal relationships with the fact that on many of these decisions, you don't see the law the same way?
On many important constitutional issues, we divide, but many everyday law issues, we agree. The court, for the most part, is deciding not heady constitutional questions, but the interpretation of dense statutes that Congress passes. For example, the Internal Revenue Code, or one of the most complex laws Congress ever passed. It's called ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or Medicare. On cases of that nature, statutory interpretation cases, Justice Scalia and I often, not always certainly, but often agree. And another thing about the two of us is we care about writing an opinion so that it is clear. We care about how you say it. Now, our style is very different. His is spicy. I don't have any distractions in my opinions commenting on the quality of my colleagues' reasoning. I just state the case. We were both law teachers in our pre-bench life. We were colleagues on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. And Justice Scalia is one of the most amusing men I know. I mean, he could make the most sober judge laugh, as he sometimes does. In the days when we were on the D.C. Circuit, I sometimes had to pinch myself when he made a comment because it was so funny.
A brief question about the role of politics. Politics, of course, should have no role in the world of the court. In the Bush years, some question how much the executive branch has attempted to step on the toes of the judicial branch. But also people look at justices and believe that justices' personal decisions about, say, retirement, those kind of things, are often impacted by presidential election years, like one we're in now. Is there any truth to any of that, the role of politics in the work you do?
I would say, as far as retirement is concerned, look at the recent examples. Justices Brennan and Marshall retired during a Republican administration. Now, it's true that Brennan was a Republican appointee. He was an Eisenhower appointee. Thurgood Marshall was a Johnson appointee. Justice Brennan had a reputation of being, quote, liberal. Yet he left in a Republican administration, as did Justice Marshall. It may be that a judge has a sense, I ought to leave during the administration of a president from the party of the president that appointed me. But more often than not, that has not been the case.
My last question for you. You're here in Chicago to speak to a group of women judges. And when you reflect back on your work in the Supreme Court, your entire career, a little early to ask the question in life, but how do you want the court to remember the work of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
I hope that I will be remembered as a judge who tried to do the best job she could with whatever talent she has. I work incredibly hard at my job. I find it constantly exhilarating, but also exhausting.
Justice Ginsburg, on behalf of the show, I thank you. As a lawyer, I have to say that it is an extreme honor that you would spend some time with me.
It was a pleasure, Paul.
And thank you for watching this very special edition of Political Update. If you'd like to reach us, go to our website, cn100.tv, and click on Political Update. We'd love to hear from you. Let me talk politics with you a little bit, but still based on your work and your writings. You wrote in Memo to the President, another New York Times bestseller, that even before you knew who the 44th president would be, although you kind of knew who it probably was going to be, didn't you?
Well, I hoped it was going to be a Democrat, that's for sure. Yeah.
Well, at that time, you said whoever this new president would be was going to inherit two wars, a global confrontation with al-Qaeda, the wars that were not conventionally begun, wars that would not end conventionally. That's what you wrote. So my question for you is, how will we know when those wars are over?
Well, that's the hard part. There's not going to be victory celebrations and surrenders as they were on the Missouri after World War II. I think that when we feel that the particular threat by that war, threat to our national security, is over, then we will know it's over. But we are living in a very difficult time where there are a variety of different threats and kinds of things that people hadn't thought of, global pandemics or cyber terrorism, where all of a sudden our information systems are compromised. And so we're living in a very different era than World War II or the Cold War.
I thought the book Memo to the President was a true wonderful memo to a president. Has President Obama read it? Do you know?
I don't know, but I gave it to him, and I wrote in it and scribed with the audacity to hope that this book will be useful to you.
How neat.